When Lydia Rowan collapsed on Caleb Rourke's frozen doorstep with her dying child in her arms, she didn't know the silent rancher inside was about to change everything. One brutal Kansas blizzard, one desperate widow with nowhere left to run, one broken man who'd sworn never to open his heart again. What began as a single night of mercy became a marriage of necessity, and then something neither of them expected. Stay with me until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The wind screamed like a dying animal across the Kansas prairie, driving snow so thick Lydia Rowan couldn't see her own frozen hands clutching her son against her chest. Little Thomas had stopped crying an hour ago. That terrified her more than his screaming ever had. "Stay with me, baby," she gasped, her voice swallowed by the storm. "Stay with Mama, please, Thomas, please stay awake." His small body felt wrong in her arms. Too still, too cold, even wrapped in every piece of clothing she owned. His lips had gone from pink to white to an awful shade of blue that made her stomach twist with a fear so sharp it cut through even the numbness spreading through her own limbs. 3 hours. 3 hours since Herman Polk had thrown them out of the tenant shack, her belongings scattered in the dirt behind them like trash. She could still see his cruel smile, could still hear his words. "Your husband's been dead 6 months, Mrs. Rowan. That deal died with him. I got a man willing to pay real rent, not work promises from a woman with a brat." She'd begged. God help her, she'd gotten on her knees in the frozen mud and begged, with Thomas crying behind her. Polk had just laughed and slammed the door she'd called home for 4 years. Now the storm that had been threatening all morning had turned into a white hell, and Lydia was lost. The town was somewhere behind her, or was it ahead? She couldn't tell anymore. The world had become nothing but white and cold in the awful certainty that she was killing her son by dragging him through this frozen nightmare. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, stumbling over something buried in the snow. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. I tried. I tried so hard, baby." Her knees buckled. She caught herself, but barely. Her legs felt like wood, stiff and unresponsive. How long before she just stopped? How long before she lay down in this white grave and pulled her son close for the last time? No. No, she wouldn't quit. Couldn't quit. Not while Thomas still breathed. Through the shrieking wind, she saw something dark. A shape. She blinked, certain it was a hallucination, but it remained. A building. A fence. Hope exploded in her chest, painful and bright. She forced her legs to move, half walking, half crawling toward that dark shape. It grew larger, a barn. Behind it, a house. Not a tenant shack like Polk's place, but a real house, 2 stories, with a porch and, oh God, smoke coming from the chimney. Someone was home. Someone with a fire. Lydia's vision blurred. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, couldn't tell if she was still walking or if she'd fallen. The porch steps appeared suddenly, impossibly tall. She dragged herself up them, Thomas clutched against her with the last of her strength. The door. She had to knock on the door. She raised her fist, but her arm wouldn't cooperate. Instead, she fell against the wood, her shoulder hitting hard enough to make a sound. Then again, and again. "Please," she tried to shout, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please, someone, my baby, please." The door swung open, and Lydia fell forward into warmth and light. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. She looked up and saw a man's face. Hard features, dark beard, eyes the color of storm clouds. His mouth was moving, but the wind was still too loud in her ears. "My son," she managed to force out. "Please, he's so cold. Please." Then the darkness came up and swallowed her whole. When consciousness returned, it came in pieces. Warmth first. Blessed, painful warmth that made her frozen skin scream. Then softness beneath her. Voices, low and urgent. The crackle of fire. "Thomas!" Lydia's eyes flew open and she tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't obey. Every muscle felt like it had been beaten with a hammer. "Easy now." A man's voice, deep and rough, like gravel under wagon wheels. "Don't move too fast." She turned her head and saw him, the man from the door, kneeling beside what looked like a settee near a massive fireplace. His large hands were rubbing a small body wrapped in blankets. Thomas. Her son's face was still too pale, but his eyes were open, and he was making small whimpering sounds. Is he? Her voice cracked. He's alive. The man didn't look at her, focused entirely on Thomas, working the boy's small hands between his own much larger ones. Got here just in time. Another hour out there. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Lydia tried again to sit up, and this time managed to prop herself on her elbows. She was on a settee across from where the man worked on Thomas. A heavy quilt covered her, and her wet clothes were gone, replaced by a man's flannel shirt that hung to her knees. Heat flooded her face. I changed your boy, the man said, as if reading her thoughts. Got him out of those wet clothes. Yours were soaked through, too. My wife's old nightdress and robe are there. He jerked his chin toward a chair where clean clothing waited. I put you in one of my shirts so you wouldn't freeze while you were out. Didn't touch nothing I shouldn't have. You have my word. There was something in his voice, a carefully maintained distance, a formality that somehow made her believe him. Still, Lydia's face burned. Mama? Thomas's small voice cut through her embarrassment. I'm here, baby. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Mama's here. I'm cold, Mama. I know, sweetheart. I know. This kind man is helping us get warm. The man, she still didn't know his name, stood abruptly and moved to a kitchen area visible through an archway. He returned with 2 mugs, one small and one large. Steam rose from both. Warmed milk with honey, he said, handing the smaller mug carefully to Thomas. The boy's hands shook too badly to hold it, so the man supported it, helping him take tiny sips. Slow now, not too much at once or you'll be sick. He handed the larger mug to Lydia. Same for you, drink it slow. The warm liquid was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. It burned going down, but it was a good burn, spreading warmth through her chest and stomach. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. When had she last eaten? Yesterday morning, maybe. She'd given Thomas the last of their bread at midday. They sat in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the crackling fire and Thomas's small sips. The man moved away to add more wood to the flames, then stood with his back to them, staring into the fire as if they weren't there. Lydia studied him. He was tall, taller than her late husband had been, with broad shoulders and the weathered look of a man who worked outdoors. His dark hair needed cutting, touching his collar and the back, and his beard was thick but trimmed close. His clothes were simple but clean. Denim trousers, a wool shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Working man's clothes, but well made. The house around them was too nice for a common farmhand. Large, well-built, furnished with solid pieces that spoke of money, or at least stability. But there was something off about it, too. It took her a moment to realize what. The house felt empty. Not of furniture, but of life. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors except one before the hearth. The mantel over the fireplace was bare of the small decorations a woman would place there. No clock, no photographs, no trinkets. I'm Lydia Rowan, she said finally, because the silence was becoming heavy. This is my son, Thomas. We're grateful to you, Mr. Rourke. Caleb Rourke. He didn't turn around. You were at Polk's place. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes, my husband and I rented one of his tenant shacks. Robert was going to buy it from him eventually. They had an arrangement. But Robert died 6 months back, kicked by a horse, and Mr. Polk, she couldn't finish. Polk threw you out. Still, Caleb didn't turn, but something in his voice had gone cold and hard. In this weather, with a child, he said he had someone willing to pay real money. Said a widow with a boy wasn't worth keeping on. The words hurt to say, even now, safe and warm in this stranger's house. They made her feel worthless, disposable. Polk's a bastard. Caleb said it matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather. Always has been. Your husband should have had the deed in writing. He did. Lydia's hands tightened on the mug. Mr. Polk burned it. Said he couldn't find any such paper, that Robert must have been lying about their arrangement. Now Caleb did turn, and the look on his face made her shrink back into the settee. It wasn't directed at her, she realized. It was pure rage aimed at Herman Polk. He burned legal papers. Caleb's voice was quiet, which somehow made it more frightening. And threw you out in a blizzard. There wasn't anything I could do. I have no money for a lawyer, no family to help. Robert's people are back east, and they never approved of our marriage. My own parents passed when I was 16. She heard how pathetic it sounded. Orphaned, widowed, homeless. No wonder Polk had felt safe throwing her away. Caleb crossed to the window, pulling back the plane curtain to look out. "Storm's getting worse. You won't be leaving tonight." Relief and panic hit her simultaneously. "Mr. Rourke, I'm grateful for your help. Truly I am. But I can't impose— Where would you go?" He let the curtain fall and faced her. His eyes were storm gray, she noticed, and tired. So tired. "Back to town? It's 5 miles, the road's buried, and by the time you walked it, if you even found it, you'd both be corpses." The bluntness of his words stole her breath. "You'll stay the night," he continued. "Tomorrow, if the storm breaks, I'll take you to town in my wagon. If it doesn't break, you'll stay until it does. That's the end of it." It should have felt like charity. Instead, it felt like a sentencing. How many times had she relied on the kindness of strangers since Robert died? How many times had she stood with her hand out, begging for a chance, for mercy, for one more day? "I can work," she said, hating the desperation in her voice. "I'm a good cook. I can clean. I can— Mrs. Rowan." Something in Caleb's tone made her stop. "You're half frozen and exhausted. Your boy's the same. Let's get through tonight before we worry about anything else." He moved to the stairs at the far end of the room. "There's 2 bedrooms upstairs. You and the boy take the one on the left. Clean sheets on the bed. Fire's laid in the hearth. I'll light it. Should stay warm enough if you keep the door closed." "Where will you sleep?" "Here." He gestured to the settee she currently occupied. "Done it before. Won't kill me." Lydia opened her mouth to protest, but he was already climbing the stairs. She heard his boots on the floor above, the sound of a door opening, the scrape of a match. Thomas had finished his milk and was looking at her with drooping eyes. "Mama, I'm tired." "I know, baby." She pulled him close, breathing in the scent of him, still alive, still hers. "We're going to sleep in a real bed tonight. Isn't that nice? Will the bad man come here?" Her heart clenched. Thomas had nightmares about Polk ever since the man had started coming around after Robert's death, making threats, touching things that weren't his, looking at Lydia in ways that made her skin crawl. "No, sweetheart. The bad man doesn't know we're here. We're safe." She wasn't sure if that was true, but she needed to believe it. For tonight, at least, they were warm and safe. Caleb came back down the stairs. "Fire's going. Room should be warm in a few minutes." Lydia stood, keeping the quilt wrapped around herself. Thomas clung to her, too big to carry easily but still small enough that she managed it. Caleb gestured toward the woman's nightdress and robe on the chair. "Take those up with you. I'll be down here if you need anything." She gathered the clothes with one hand, Thomas heavy in her other arm. At the base of the stairs, she paused. "Mr. Rourke, I don't have words enough to thank you. You saved our lives tonight." He didn't respond, just turned back to the fire and added another log, his back to her. Dismissed. Lydia climbed the stairs, her legs shaking with exhaustion. The hallway upstairs was dark, except for the flickering light coming from the open door on the left. She carried Thomas into the room and stopped, just taking it in. It was the most beautiful room she'd seen in years, large with a real glass window, a full-size bed with an iron frame, a proper dresser, and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. The fire Caleb had lit in the small hearth cast dancing shadows on the walls. The bed had clean white sheets, a thick quilt, and pillows, real feather pillows, not the straw-stuffed ones she'd used at Polk's. Thomas was already asleep by the time she laid him on the bed. She changed quickly into the nightdress, which was too big but clean and soft, then added the robe over it. The woman who'd owned these things had been taller than Lydia, broader in the shoulders. Caleb's wife, he'd said. Where was she? Dead, Lydia guessed. Something in the way Caleb had said, "my wife's old nightdress." Old, not current. Something in the emptiness of the house, the absence of a woman's touch. Something in his eyes, that bone-deep weariness that came from loss. She climbed into bed beside Thomas, pulling the heavy quilt over them both. The mattress was real horsehair, not corn shucks. The sheet smelled like lavender and winter air. The pillow cradled her head like a cloud. For the first time in 6 months, Lydia Rowan felt safe. She closed her eyes and let herself fall into darkness. While downstairs, Caleb Rourke sat alone by his fire and tried not to remember the last time he'd heard a woman's footsteps in his house. Lydia woke to gray morning light filtering through the window and the sound of wind still howling outside. The fire had burned down to embers, but the room was still warm beneath the thick quilt. Thomas slept curled against her side, his breathing deep and even. She lay still for a long moment, letting herself feel the simple luxury of warmth and safety. Then reality crept back in. Today the storm would break, and Caleb Rourke would take them to town. And then what? She had no money, no home. Herman Polk still owned half the rentals in the area, and he'd make sure no one else would take her in. She'd have to throw herself on the mercy of the church, maybe, or find work that would let her keep Thomas with her. But what work could a widow with a small child do? Most decent positions required references she didn't have, skills she'd never learned. The spiral of panic was starting when she heard footsteps below, then the sound of a door opening and closing. She rose carefully, not wanting to wake Thomas, and moved to the window. Through the frost on the glass, she could see Caleb trudging through knee-deep snow toward the barn, his coat collar pulled up against the wind. The storm wasn't breaking. If anything, it looked worse than yesterday. A strange feeling moved through her, relief and guilt intertwined. Relieved she didn't have to leave yet. Guilty for being relieved. She turned from the window and looked around the room properly in the daylight. Like the rest of the house, it was well made but bare of personal touches. No pictures on the walls, no brush on the dresser. The only sign anyone had ever lived here was a water stain on the wallpaper near the ceiling and a small notch in the windowsill, as if someone had once kept the window propped open with a stick. The door across the hall was closed, the master bedroom, she assumed. Did Caleb sleep there, or had that been too much after his wife died? Was that why he'd slept downstairs on the settee? Thomas stirred and opened his eyes. "Mama?" "I'm here, sweetheart." She moved back to the bed and smoothed his hair. "How do you feel?" "Warm." He said it with wonder, like he'd forgotten what warm felt like. "Are you hungry?" He nodded, and Lydia's stomach twisted. She had no food to give him, no way to feed him except to depend, once again, on a stranger's charity. "Let's go downstairs and see if Mr. Rourke has something for breakfast." She helped Thomas dress in his clothes from yesterday, dry now, though they'd need washing. She pulled the robe tight over the borrowed nightdress, feeling exposed and awkward, but she had no choice. Her own dress was presumably still wet. Downstairs, the house was empty, but warm. Caleb had built up the fire before going out. On the table near the kitchen, a solid oak piece that could seat 8, she found bread, butter, and a jar of preserves. A pot of coffee sat on the stove, still hot. No note, no instructions, but the meaning was clear. Help yourself. Lydia cut bread for Thomas and spread it with butter and preserves, watching him eat like he hadn't seen food in days. Which wasn't far from the truth. She poured herself coffee, black because she didn't want to presume to use his cream and sugar, and stood at the window watching the snow fall. The barn was a dark shape through the white curtain of the storm. What was Caleb doing out there? Feeding animals, she supposed? Rancher, he'd said he was. Or had he? No, she'd just assumed. She finished her coffee and looked around the kitchen. It was clean but clearly the domain of a man living alone. No curtains on the windows, no cloth on the table, no plants or decorations. The stove was good quality, but looked like it had seen hard use. The shelves were stocked with basic staples, nothing fancy. Before she could talk herself out of it, Lydia began to clean. She washed the few dishes in the basin, dried them, put them away. She found a broom in the pantry and swept the kitchen floor. In the main room, she folded the quilts Caleb had used on the settee, straightened the cushions, swept the hearth. It felt presumptuous to touch his things, to move through his space like she belonged there. But she couldn't just sit idle, couldn't just take without giving something back, even something as small as a swept floor. She was washing the windows. They were filthy, covered in months of dust and grime, when the door opened and Caleb stamped in, bringing a gust of snow and cold air with him. He stopped just inside, staring at her standing on a chair with a rag in her hand. "What are you doing?" She climbed down quickly, feeling her face heat. "I'm sorry. I just thought, you've been so kind, and I wanted to help. I can stop if..." The windows needed cleaning. He shrugged out of his coat and hung it on a peg by the door. Snow clung to his beard and eyebrows. Storm's not letting up. Probably won't for another day or two. 2 more days. Relief and guilt again, that twisted combination. I'm sorry to impose on you longer than, not your fault the weather won't cooperate. He moved to the fire and held his hands out to the flames. The boy all right? Yes. He ate. Thank you for leaving the food out. Plenty more in the pantry. Help yourself to whatever you need. The words were gruff, but not unkind. Lydia clutched the rag, unsure what to do with her hands. Is there anything I can do? Any work you need help with? You're recovering from nearly freezing to death. Sit down. Rest. I've been resting. I feel fine. That wasn't entirely true. Her muscles still ached, and her fingers and toes burned with the return of circulation. But she couldn't just sit idle while he worked. Please, Mr. Rourke, let me help. He turned and studied her with those storm-gray eyes. You know how to cook? Yes. The chickens need feeding. Barn cat needs feeding. I've got beef in the cold cellar that needs to be brought up and cooked before it turns. I was planning on just frying it, but if you can make it into something more... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. I'm not much of a cook. I can make it into a stew, if you have vegetables, potatoes, that sort of thing. Pantry's stocked. My housekeeper... He stopped, his jaw tightening. There's plenty there. Use what you need. Housekeeper, past tense. Another loss, another absence in this house full of empty spaces. Thank you, Lydia said. I'll make us something good. For just a moment, something flickered in Caleb's eyes, surprise maybe, or gratitude. Then it was gone, and he was turning away again, moving toward the stairs. I need to change out of these wet clothes. You need anything from upstairs before I go up? No, we're fine. He climbed the stairs, and Lydia heard the sound of that closed door opening, then closing. The master bedroom. So he did still sleep there. She turned to Thomas, who was watching her with wide eyes from his spot at the table. Come on, sweetheart. Let's see what we can make for dinner. The pantry was indeed well stocked. Flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, rice, canned goods, root vegetables stored in a bin, even some dried herbs hanging from hooks. The cold cellar, accessed through a door in the pantry floor, contained the beef Caleb had mentioned, along with pork, more vegetables, and what looked like wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth. This was no poor man's ranch. Caleb Rourke had money, or at least security. The question was why a man with a house like this, land like this, was living alone. Widow, her mind whispered. Like you. She pushed the thought away and focused on work. She brought up the beef, a good roast, well marbled, and set it in the kitchen. Found potatoes, carrots, onions, flour for dumplings, the ingredients for a meal that would fill their bellies and last for days. By the time Caleb came back down in dry clothes, Lydia had the beef searing in a Dutch oven, the vegetables chopped, and the smell of browning meat and onions filling the house. Thomas sat at the table, carefully peeling potatoes with a small knife under her watchful eye, his tongue poking out in concentration. Caleb stopped in the doorway to the kitchen, just watching. Lydia felt his gaze but didn't turn, didn't stop working. After a long moment, he spoke. Smells good. It'll be a few hours yet. Beef needs time to get tender. Haven't had a proper stew and... He didn't finish. I appreciate it. It's the least I can do. It's more than that. His voice was rough. This house hasn't had... It's been quiet for a long time. Lydia did turn then, meeting his eyes. The weariness she'd seen before was deeper now, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical labor. This was a man who'd been alone too long, who'd forgotten what it felt like to have life in his house. How long? She asked softly. Since your wife? 3 years. The words seemed pulled from him. 3 years come January. The same month Robert had died, she thought. January was a cruel month. I'm sorry for your loss. He nodded, just once, and turned away. I've got work to do. Come get me when dinner's ready. He left through the front door, back out into the storm, and Lydia turned back to her cooking. But something had shifted in the house. Some invisible wall had cracked, just a little. Outside, the storm raged on, trapping them together. Inside, the smell of good food filled empty spaces, and a child's laughter rang through rooms that had been silent too long. Neither of them knew yet that this storm would change everything, that what began as one night of mercy would become something neither could walk away from. But the house knew. The house had been waiting, holding its breath, for someone to bring it back to life. And Lydia Rowan, widow and mother, desperate and proud and stronger than she knew, was about to do exactly that. The stew simmered on the stove, filling every corner of Caleb Rourke's house with smells he'd almost forgotten: garlic and thyme, beef and vegetables, the yeasty warmth of rising dough. Lydia had found flour and made biscuits to go with the meal, and now they cooled on a rack while Thomas sat at the table drawing pictures in the condensation on the window with his finger. 3 days. 3 days the storm had raged without letting up, and 3 days Lydia and her son had been trapped in this house with a man who spoke maybe 20 words a day and disappeared into his work like a ghost fading at dawn. She'd learned his rhythms quickly. Up before sunrise to tend the animals, back for coffee, but never breakfast. Out again until noon. He'd come in for the midday meal she prepared, eat in silence while Thomas chattered about nothing, then vanish again until supper. After supper, he'd sit by the fire with a book or papers, ranch accounts, she guessed, while she cleaned up, and then he'd retire upstairs while she and Thomas took the guest room. It should have been awkward, this strange domesticity with a man she didn't know. Instead, it felt like slipping into a coat that fit just right, comfortable in a way that frightened her because it couldn't last. The front door opened, and Caleb stamped in with an armload of firewood. Snow clung to his hat and shoulders despite the short walk from the woodpile. He stacked the logs by the hearth, then pulled off his gloves and moved toward the stove, drawn by the warmth and the smell. "Dinner's almost ready," Lydia said, stirring the stew one more time. "Just needs 5 more minutes." He nodded and poured himself coffee from the pot she kept fresh throughout the day. Another thing she'd learned, Caleb Rourke ran on coffee and silence. "Storm's finally breaking," he said, his first words to her since breakfast. "Should clear by tomorrow." Lydia's hand stilled on the spoon. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he'd hitch up his wagon and take them to town, and this strange interlude would end. Back to reality, back to having no home, no prospects, no way to feed her son. "That's good," she managed to say, though her throat felt tight. "You've been very patient with us." "Wasn't your fault." He took a long drink of coffee, his eyes on the window and the white world beyond. "Can't control the weather. Still, we've imposed. You've cooked and cleaned. House hasn't been this—" He stopped, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "It's been fair." Fair. As if 3 days of her labor equaled 3 days of shelter and safety. As if she hadn't been terrified every night that tomorrow would come and she'd have to face the world again with nothing. Thomas slid off his chair and tugged at Caleb's sleeve. "Mr. Rourke, look what I drew." He showed Caleb the window where he'd traced a wobbly horse in the condensation. Caleb studied it seriously, then nodded. "That's a fine horse. Good strong legs. Mama says you have horses. Real ones." "I do. Got 6 horses, 20 head of cattle, and a barn cat that thinks she runs the place." "Can I see them?" "Thomas," Lydia said quickly, "Mr. Rourke is busy. Don't pester him." But Caleb was looking at the boy with something almost like interest in his eyes. "Storm breaks tomorrow, like I said. I'll take you out to the barn, let you meet the horses, if your mama says it's all right." Thomas spun toward Lydia, his face lit up with hope. "Can I, Mama? Please?" She couldn't deny him this small thing, not when he'd had so little to be happy about lately. "If Mr. Rourke doesn't mind, and if you promise to be good and do exactly what he tells you." "I promise." The smallest hint of a smile tugged at Caleb's mouth, there and gone so fast Lydia almost missed it, but she'd seen it, and something warm bloomed in her chest. He wasn't as hard as he pretended to be, this silent rancher. They ate dinner at the big table, and for once Caleb lingered over his meal instead of bolting it down and retreating to his paperwork. Thomas filled the silence with 3-year-old chatter, stories about the pictures he'd drawn, questions about the horses, observations about the snow. Caleb answered in his sparse way, but he answered, and once or twice Lydia caught him watching Thomas with something tender in his storm-gray eyes. After dinner, Thomas fell asleep on the settee by the fire, worn out from talking. Lydia covered him with a quilt and started to clear the table, but Caleb's voice stopped her. "Leave it. Come sit down." She turned, surprised. He'd pulled one of the chairs closer to the fire and was settling into another with his coffee. An invitation. The first real one he'd offered. Lydia sat, smoothing her borrowed nightdress. She'd been wearing it for days now, rotating between it and her own dress that she washed and hung to dry. She felt shabby and out of place in this nice house, but Caleb didn't seem to notice or care. "You'll need a plan," he said, his eyes on the fire, "for when you get to town." The warmth in her chest turned cold. "I know. Polk won't rent to you. He's got friends who won't either." "I know that too. So what will you do?" Lydia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "I'll find work. There's Mrs. Henderson who takes in washing. Maybe she needs help, or the hotel might need a maid. That won't pay enough for room and board, not with a child. Then I'll figure something else out." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I always do." Caleb turned to look at her directly. "How long since your husband died?" 6 months. "And you've been managing alone all that time?" "I had the shack at Polk's place, and I had some money from selling Robert's tools, his watch. It ran out last month." She hated admitting it, hated the sound of defeat in her own voice. "I asked Polk for more time. He said I could have it if I—" She couldn't finish. Couldn't say out loud what Herman Polk had suggested, the way he'd looked at her, the things he'd implied. Caleb's hands tightened on his coffee cup. "If you what?" "It doesn't matter. I refused, so he threw us out." The silence that followed was dangerous, full of fury barely contained. When Caleb finally spoke, his voice was quiet and cold. "Polk's lucky I found you when I did. If you died out there, if your boy had died," he set his cup down with deliberate care, "I'd have killed him." Lydia believed him, the certainty in his voice, the rigid set of his shoulders. This was a man capable of violence when pushed. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel protected. "But we didn't die," she said softly. "You saved us. And tomorrow, I'm taking you back to a town where you have no money, no home, and no prospects. Some salvation, that is. What else can you do? We can't stay here forever." "Why not?" The words hung in the air between them. Lydia stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "What?" Caleb shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. "This house has been empty too long. I can't keep up with it alone. The cooking, the cleaning, the mending. I tried hiring a housekeeper after Sarah died, but she was old and her rheumatism got bad. She quit last fall. Haven't found anyone else." "I don't understand what you're suggesting." "You need a home. I need help." He met her eyes, and she saw no subterfuge there, no hidden agenda, just a simple practical man stating a simple practical problem. "You could stay. Work for room and board. The boy, too. There's plenty of space." Lydia's heart hammered against her ribs. Stay here? In this warm house with its solid walls and full pantry? Let Thomas grow up safe instead of scared? It sounded like a dream, which meant it couldn't be real. "People would talk," she said, "a widow living alone with a single man." "Let them talk. Nearest neighbor is 3 miles away, and I don't give a damn what Herman Polk and his friends think." "It wouldn't be proper." "Neither is freezing to death in a blizzard," his voice roughened. "I'm offering you honest work, Mrs. Rowan. Nothing more. You'd have your own room, your boy would be safe and fed, and you'd answer to no one but yourself. That's more than you'll get anywhere else." He was right, and they both knew it. Still, Lydia hesitated. There had to be a catch, something he wasn't saying. Men didn't offer sanctuary without expecting something in return. "If I stayed," she said carefully, "what exactly would my duties be?" "What you've been doing. Cooking, cleaning, mending, maybe help in the garden come spring. I'd pay you, not much, but enough to save if you wanted to move on eventually." "And that's all?" Understanding flashed in his eyes, followed by something that might have been anger, but not at her. "I'm not Herman Polk, Mrs. Rowan. I'm not looking for anything except someone to keep my house in order. My wife's been dead 3 years, and I loved her enough that I'm not interested in replacing her, especially not with a woman who'd only be here because she had no other choice. The bluntness of it stung, but Lydia appreciated the honesty. Better to know where she stood than to wonder and worry. How long would you want me to stay? As long as it suits us both. You want to leave? You leave. Just give me fair warning so I can find someone else. It was more than fair. It was generous, though Caleb would probably deny it. And it meant Thomas would be safe, warm, fed. That alone was worth any gossip, any impropriety. All right, she said. I'll stay. Something eased in Caleb's expression, though he only nodded. Good. That settled then. He picked up his coffee and went back to staring at the fire, and Lydia understood the conversation was over. She rose quietly and went back to the kitchen to finish cleaning up, her mind spinning. She was going to stay. In this house, with this strange, silent man, indefinitely. It should have felt dangerous, reckless. Instead, it felt like the first safe decision she'd made in 6 months. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. The storm had blown itself out sometime before dawn, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. Caleb was up early, and Lydia heard him shoveling a path from the house to the barn before she'd even made coffee. Thomas woke excited about seeing the horses and could barely sit still through breakfast. Lydia dressed him in his warmest clothes, still shabby, but at least clean, and wrapped him in quilts before Caleb could take him outside. Keep him away from the hooves, she said, knowing she was being overprotective but unable to stop herself. And don't let him get cold. I'll watch him. Caleb's eyes were warmer this morning, less guarded. He'll be fine. She watched from the window as Caleb led Thomas through the shoveled path toward the barn, her son's small hand swallowed by the rancher's large one. Something about the sight made her chest ache, not with sadness, but with a longing so sharp it hurt. Robert had never been patient with Thomas, had always expected the boy to be quieter, more manageable. But Caleb bent down to answer Thomas's endless questions, adjusted his stride to match the child's shorter legs, pointed out animal tracks in the snow. They were gone for an hour. When they came back, Thomas was pink-cheeked and glowing with happiness, chattering about a horse named Buck and a cat named Smoke, and the new calf that had been born in the night. Mr. Rourke let me feed Buck, Thomas announced, bouncing on his toes. And he said when I'm bigger, he'll teach me to ride. Lydia looked at Caleb, who just shrugged. Boy should know how to ride if he's going to live on a ranch. Live on a ranch. The words settled into Lydia's bones like warmth. This was real. This was happening. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Caleb worked his ranch, disappearing for hours to mend fences, check on cattle, chop wood, do the 1,000 tasks that kept a place running. Lydia kept the house, cooking, cleaning, organizing, restoring order to rooms that had been neglected too long. Thomas played and helped where he could, carrying wood, sweeping floors, learning to be useful. It was on the 5th day that Lydia ventured into the room she'd been avoiding, the upstairs bedroom at the end of the hall. Caleb slept in the master bedroom, and she and Thomas occupied the guest room, but there was a 3rd door she'd never opened. That morning, gathering laundry, she found it ajar. She knocked, waited, then pushed it open. It was a woman's room, frozen in time. A sewing basket sat beside a rocking chair, still full of half-finished needlework. Dresses hung in the wardrobe, beautiful dresses, far nicer than anything Lydia had ever owned. The dresser held hairbrushes, ribbons, a small music box shaped like a bird. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Sarah's room. It had to be. Caleb's wife had died 3 years ago, and he'd simply closed the door and left everything exactly as it had been. Lydia shouldn't touch anything. She knew that. This was private, sacred, none of her business. But the room felt wrong. Not like a shrine, but like a wound that had never healed. A room closed off was a room that couldn't let go. She made a decision that might have been overstepping, but felt necessary. She cleaned. She dusted every surface, washed the windows, aired out the linens. She left the personal items exactly where they were. The hairbrushes, the jewelry, the small things that had touched Sarah Rourke's skin. But she made the room clean, cared for, respected. Not erased, but honored. Caleb found her there as she was finishing, standing in the doorway with an unreadable expression. "I'm sorry," Lydia said quickly. "I know I shouldn't have. The door was open, and I thought, I'm sorry." He stepped into the room, looking around at the changes she'd made. His hand brushed the quilt on the bed, the same one that had covered Lydia the first night, she realized. He'd given her his wife's quilt. Sarah would have wanted it clean, he said finally, his voice rough. She hated dust. I didn't move anything personal, just cleaned. I know. He picked up the music box from the dresser, turned it over in his hands. She loved this thing. Her father bought it for her when she was 10. It plays Greensleeves. That's beautiful. She was beautiful. He set the box down carefully. And kind. And patient with me when I didn't deserve it. He looked at Lydia. I don't talk about her, haven't, not in years. But you should know, she'd approve of you being here. Sarah always said this house was too big to stay empty. Tears burned Lydia's eyes. Thank you for telling me. He nodded and left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Lydia finished putting away her cleaning supplies, then closed the door gently behind her, not locking away the past, but giving it space to rest. That evening, something shifted between them. Caleb talked more at dinner, asking about her day, telling her about the calf that was thriving, the fence that needed replacing. Small things, but they felt enormous after days of silence. Thomas sensed the change too, becoming braver, asking Caleb to tell him stories about the horses, about the ranch, about the time a coyote tried to steal one of the chickens. After Thomas fell asleep, Caleb brought out a wooden box from a cupboard and set it on the table. Sarah's sewing things, he said. There's fabric in there, thread, needles. If you want to make the boys some new clothes, help yourself. There's enough to make yourself something too. Lydia looked at the box, overwhelmed. I couldn't. That's too much. It's sitting in a cupboard doing nothing. Sarah would want it used. He pushed the box toward her. Besides, the boy's trousers are getting short. He's growing. He was right. Thomas had grown in the 6 months since Robert died, and Lydia had been letting down hems and letting out seams until there was nothing left to let. She opened the box and found treasures. Beautiful fabric in blues and browns, sturdy cotton for work clothes, even a piece of soft wool for a winter coat. Thank you, she whispered, just being practical. But it wasn't just practical, and they both knew it. This was acceptance. This was Caleb Rourke saying, you're not leaving. This is your home now. 2 weeks after the storm, the world outside had thawed enough for travel, and Caleb announced he needed to go into town for supplies. Lydia's stomach twisted with anxiety. Town meant people who would know she was living here, meant gossip, meant Hermann Polk. I should stay here, she said. You need things, both of you. Caleb was making a list, his handwriting surprisingly neat. Boots for the boy, his are falling apart. Warmer coat, medicine for the cabinet. Anything else? I don't have money I'm buying supplies for my household. That includes you now. He didn't look up from his list. So what do you need? Lydia swallowed her pride because Thomas needed boots, needed a coat, needed things she couldn't provide. Just what you said, for Thomas. And for you? I'm fine. Now he did look up, his eyes sharp. Mrs. Rowan, when's the last time you had a new dress? That doesn't matter. It does if you're working for me. Can't have my housekeeper looking like she's starving. People will think I don't pay fair wages. It was the same gruff practicality he'd used before, but Lydia was beginning to understand that this was how Caleb showed kindness, by making it seem necessary, logical, nothing to do with generosity or care. A dress would be nice, she admitted, and some stockings. Mine have more darns than original thread. He added it to the list, then folded it and tucked it in his pocket. I'll take Thomas with me. Let him pick out his own boots. You stay here and rest. I don't need to rest. You've worked every day for 2 weeks without stopping. Take a day. His tone left no room for argument. Besides, the boy will enjoy the trip. He was right again. Thomas was thrilled at the prospect of going to town with Mr. Rourke, and Lydia found herself standing on the porch watching them drive away in the wagon, feeling strangely bereft. The house was too quiet without Thomas's chatter, too empty without Caleb's solid presence. She cleaned anyway, because she didn't know what else to do with herself. She baked bread and started a stew for supper. She sat at the table with Sarah's sewing box and began cutting fabric for Thomas's new trousers. But her mind kept drifting to town, to Caleb and Thomas walking into the general store, to what people would say. They returned just before supper, and Lydia knew immediately that something had happened. Caleb's jaw was tight, his eyes hard, and he didn't speak as he carried supplies into the house. Thomas ran to show her his new boots, but even his excitement was dimmed. "What happened?" Lydia asked quietly while Thomas was distracted. "Polk was in town. Caleb set a sack of flour down harder than necessary. Started running his mouth about you living here. Said some things he shouldn't have." Ice slid down Lydia's spine. "What things?" "Doesn't matter. I set him straight." "Caleb." She used his first name without thinking. "What did he say?" He looked at her, and she saw fury in his eyes. "Called you a whore. Said you were warming my bed for room and board. Said Thomas wasn't even your husband's boy, that you'd probably been spreading your legs for—" He stopped, his hands curling into fists. "I'm not repeating the rest." Lydia's face burned with humiliation and rage. "What did you do?" "Told him he was a liar, in front of the whole store. Told him if he said another word about you, I'd horsewhip him in the street." "You shouldn't have done that. You'll make him angrier." "Let him be angry. He's a bully and a coward, and bullies need to be stood up to." Caleb's voice was hard as iron. "No one talks about you that way. Not while you're under my protection." Under my protection. The words wrapped around Lydia like a blanket, warm and safe and terrifying because she was starting to depend on them too much. That night, lying in bed with Thomas asleep beside her, Lydia stared at the ceiling and admitted a truth she'd been avoiding. She didn't want to leave this house. Not next month, not next year, maybe not ever. She was starting to feel like this was home, like Caleb and his quiet kindness and his broken pieces that matched her own were family. It was dangerous to feel that way. Dangerous to start depending on a man's protection, a man's provision. She'd learned that lesson when Robert died. Learned that security could vanish in a heartbeat, leaving you with nothing. But Caleb wasn't Robert. Robert had been charming and careless, always sure something better was around the corner. Caleb was steady, solid, a man who kept his word and honored his obligations. Still, Lydia promised herself she wouldn't get too comfortable, wouldn't start thinking of this arrangement as permanent. She was an employee, nothing more, and when the time came to leave, she would leave with her dignity intact. The next week brought the first real test of their arrangement. Lydia woke one morning to find Thomas burning with fever, his small body shaking with chills. Panic seized her. She'd lost Robert so quickly, so suddenly, and the thought of losing Thomas too. "Caleb!" She didn't realize she'd screamed his name until she heard his boots thundering up the stairs. He burst into the room, half-dressed, his face tight with alarm. "What's wrong?" "Thomas. He's burning up." Her hands shook as she pressed them to her son's forehead. "I don't know what to do. I don't have any medicine. Let me see." Caleb moved to the bed, his large hand gentle on Thomas's forehead. "He's hot, but not dangerously so. When did this start?" "I don't know. He was fine when we went to sleep." "All right, don't panic." Caleb's calm voice cut through her fear. "I'll ride to town, fetch the doctor. You stay here. Keep him cool. There's feverfew tea in the kitchen cupboard. Make him drink some if you can." He was gone before she could thank him, moving with swift purpose. Lydia followed his instructions, brewing the bitter tea and coaxing Thomas to swallow small sips. She bathed his face with cool water, changed his sweat-soaked nightshirt, held him when he cried for his papa. Caleb returned 3 hours later with Dr. Morrison, an elderly man who examined Thomas with patient thoroughness. "It's just a fever," he announced finally. "Probably a winter cold that settled in his chest. Keep him warm, make sure he drinks plenty of fluids, and it should pass in a few days." The relief was so intense Lydia had to sit down. "Are you sure?" "Sure as I can be, Mrs. Rowan. Your boy is young and strong. He'll be fine." Dr. Morrison packed up his bag and accepted Caleb's payment. "Though I must say I'm surprised to find you here. Mr. Polk told me you'd left the county." "Polk was wrong," Caleb said flatly. "Mrs. Rowan is my housekeeper. She lives here now." "I see." The doctor's tone was neutral, but his eyes were shrewd. "Well, she's lucky to have found such generous employment. Not many men would take in a widow with a child. Not many men need a good housekeeper as badly as I did." Caleb walked the doctor to the door. "Thank you for coming." After the doctor left, Caleb came back upstairs to check on Thomas, who was sleeping now, his breathing easier. Lydia sat beside the bed, exhausted from fear and relief. "Thank you," she said, "for getting the doctor, for not making me feel like a burden." "You're not a burden." Caleb stood in the doorway, too big for the frame. "You're—" He stopped, struggling with words. This house needed life in it again. You and the boy, you brought that. So no, you're not a burden. He left before she could respond, but Lydia sat in the darkness and felt something shift in her chest. Something dangerous and warm and entirely inappropriate for a woman who was just an employee, just a temporary fixture in a lonely man's house. Thomas recovered over the next few days, just as the doctor had promised. And life on the ranch continued, day after day of quiet routine that felt more like home than anywhere Lydia had lived since her parents died. But in town, Herman Polk was nursing his wounded pride and planning revenge. And in 3 weeks, he would come to Caleb Rourke's ranch with armed men and bad intentions, and everything would change again. Neither Lydia nor Caleb knew what was coming. They only knew that the house was warm, the work was steady, and somewhere in the quiet hours between dawn and dusk, they were both starting to feel a little less alone. Spring was trying to break through winter's grip the day Caleb found Lydia crying in the kitchen. She had her back to the door, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs as she stared at something in her hands. He'd come in from the barn early, meaning to tell her about the mare that was about to foal, but the sound of her crying stopped him cold. "Lydia." He said her name quietly, not wanting to startle her. "What's wrong?" She turned, hastily wiping her eyes, and he saw what she was holding. A letter, the paper thin and worn. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you come in." "What happened?" "Nothing. It's foolish." But fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pressed the letter to her chest. "I found this in my coat pocket. I'd forgotten it was there. It's from Robert, from before he died. Just a silly note he left me one morning before going to work with the horses." Her voice broke. "He wrote that he loved me, that he'd be home for supper, but he never came home." Caleb crossed the kitchen and did something he'd never done before. He pulled her into his arms. She stiffened for just a moment, then collapsed against his chest, sobbing like her heart was breaking all over again. He held her while she cried, one hand awkward on her back, feeling useless and angry at a dead man for making her hurt like this. "I'm sorry," she gasped against his shirt. "I shouldn't fall apart like this. It's been 8 months. I should be stronger." Grief doesn't work on a schedule. His voice was rough with his own memories. "I still find things of Sarah's that make me feel like I'm drowning. A hair ribbon, a recipe in her handwriting. It doesn't stop hurting just because time passes." Lydia pulled back enough to look up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "How do you bear it?" "By keeping busy. By getting up every morning and doing the work that needs doing." He hesitated, then admitted, "And by being less alone than I was. You and Thomas, you've helped more than you know." Something shifted in her expression, something soft and vulnerable that made his chest tighten. They were standing too close, her hands still pressed against his shirt, his arms still around her. He could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. For one dangerous moment, he wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly his hands shook with the effort of restraining himself. But she was grieving her husband, and he was supposed to be her employer, nothing more. So he stepped back, letting his arms fall to his sides. "Keep the letter," he said. "Put it somewhere safe. Those memories are worth holding on to." "Thank you." Her voice was barely a whisper. "For understanding." He nodded and turned to leave before he could do something stupid, but her voice stopped him at the door. "Caleb? You're less alone now, too. I hope you know that." He did know it. That was the problem. He was getting used to her presence in his house, her voice in his kitchen, her laughter when Thomas said something funny. He was getting used to not being alone, and that was dangerous because nothing lasted forever. She'd leave eventually, find a man to marry, or save enough money to start over somewhere else, and he'd be alone again in his big empty house. That afternoon he was mending fence in the far pasture when he saw riders approaching. 3 men on horseback, moving fast across his land like they owned it. Caleb recognized the lead rider immediately. Herman Polk, his face red with anger and whiskey courage. The two men with him were strangers, but they wore guns on their hips and had the look of hired muscle. Caleb set down his tools and walked to meet them, his own pistol suddenly heavy on his hip. He rarely wore it, but something had made him strap it on this morning. Instinct, maybe. Or luck. Polk reined in his horse 20 feet away, deliberately making Caleb look up at him. A power play. Caleb waited, patient and still, until Polk had to speak first. "You've got something that belongs to me, Rourke." "Don't recall borrowing anything from you, Polk." "That widow, Lydia Rowan, she owes me 3 months' rent." "She doesn't owe you anything. You threw her out, remember?" "Deal was over." "Deal was she'd pay in coin or trade." "She never paid either." Polk's smile was ugly. "I'm here to collect what's owed, with interest." Caleb's hands curled into fists. "Get off my land." "Not without the woman. She can come willing, or we'll take her. Your choice." The two hired men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their guns. Caleb calculated odds and didn't like them. 3 against 1, and he wasn't a young man anymore. But he'd die before he let Polk touch Lydia. "You're not taking her anywhere." His voice was cold and flat. "And if you try, I'll put a bullet in you." Polk laughed, but there was nervousness under it. "Big talk from one man against 3. You really want to die for a whore who's probably spreading her legs for—" The gunshot cracked across the pasture, sharp and final. All 4 men froze. Polk's hat flew off his head, spinning away in the spring wind. He grabbed for his bare scalp, his face white with shock. "Next one won't miss." Lydia's voice rang out clear and strong from the porch of the house, 100 yards away. She stood with Caleb's shotgun braced against her shoulder, her stance solid, her eyes cold. "Get off this land before I put the next shot somewhere more permanent." Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs, pride and terror mixed together. She could have hit Polk, could have killed him. Instead, she'd sent a message, and everyone understood it. Polk was shaking, whether from fear or rage, Caleb couldn't tell. "You crazy bitch! You tried to kill me!" "I didn't try anything. If I'd wanted you dead, you'd be dead." She pumped the shotgun, chambering another shell. "You've got to the count of 10 to be off this property. 1. You can't. 2. The hired men were already turning their horses. They hadn't been paid enough to face down an angry woman with a gun and good aim. "This isn't over, Rourke." Polk grabbed for his reins, his horse dancing nervously. "You'll regret this." 3, 4. Lydia's voice never wavered. Polk spurred his horse and fled, his men following. They disappeared over the ridge at a gallop, and the silence they left behind was deafening. Caleb walked back to the house, his legs unsteady. Lydia still stood on the porch, the shotgun lowered now but still in her hands. Thomas peeked out from behind her skirts, his eyes huge. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" Caleb asked when he reached her. "My father taught me. He said a woman on the frontier needed to know how to protect herself." Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. "I haven't fired a gun in years. I wasn't sure I still could." "You hit exactly what you aimed at." He took the shotgun gently from her hands. "That was either the best shooting I've ever seen or the luckiest. Bit of both, maybe." She sank down onto the porch steps, suddenly boneless. "I was in the kitchen when I saw them riding up. The way they looked, the way Polk was acting, I knew it was trouble. So I grabbed your shotgun from over the mantel and came out. You could have been killed. So could you." She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. "Did you think I'd stand by and watch him hurt you after everything you've done for us?" Something in his chest cracked open, letting in light and warmth and a feeling he'd thought died with Sarah. He sat down beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Thank you," he said simply. "We're even now." But she was smiling, shaky and small, and he found himself smiling back. Thomas climbed onto Caleb's lap, needing reassurance. "Is the bad man gone?" "He's gone, buddy, and he's not coming back." Mama was so brave. She scared him away. She did. Caleb met Lydia's eyes over the boy's head. "Your mama's the bravest person I know." They sat there for a long moment, the 3 of them together on the porch, while Caleb's mind raced ahead to what came next. Polk wouldn't let this go. He'd nurse his wounded pride and his fear, and he'd come back. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. Caleb needed to make sure Lydia and Thomas were protected, legally and permanently, before that happened. There was only one way to do that. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Caleb poured himself a whiskey and poured one for Lydia too. She took it with raised eyebrows but didn't refuse. They sat by the fire, and Caleb tried to figure out how to say what needed saying. "Polk's going to cause trouble," he said finally. "Today was just the start. He'll go to the sheriff, claim you stole from him or owe him money. He'll make your life hell any way he can." "I know." Lydia sipped her whiskey, coughing a little at the burn. "I've been thinking the same thing. There's only one way to stop him permanently. One way to make sure he can't touch you or Thomas." Caleb turned to face her fully. "Marry me." She choked on her whiskey, her eyes going wide. "What?" "Marry me, legally, in front of witnesses at the church." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was proposing a business arrangement, which, he supposed, he was. "If you're my wife, Polk can't claim you owe him anything, can't touch you. And Thomas would be legally mine. I'd adopt him, give him my name. He'd inherit this ranch someday." "Caleb, that's—" She set down her glass with shaking hands. "That's too much. You can't just marry me to protect me from Herman Polk." "Why not? We get along well enough. You're already running my household. Thomas calls me Mr. Rourke, but he could call me Pa if he wanted. It makes sense. It's insane. It's practical." He held her gaze, willing her to understand. "I'm not asking for a real marriage, Lydia. We'd keep separate rooms, live like we do now. But on paper, legally, you'd be protected. You'd never have to worry about having a roof over your head or food for your boy. And I'd have—" He stopped, the words sticking in his throat. "You'd have what?" "Company. Family, even if it's just for show." He looked away, embarrassed by his own loneliness. "This house has been dead too long. You brought it back to life. I don't want it to die again when you leave. And if I want to leave, if I meet someone I actually love, or if you do, then we'll figure it out. Get an annulment if we haven't—" He cleared his throat. "If the marriage stays in name only, annulment won't be hard. But I don't think either of us is looking for love, Lydia. We both had it once. Maybe that's enough for one lifetime." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd refuse. Then she spoke, her voice small and uncertain. "Thomas needs a father. He needs stability, security, a home he won't be thrown out of. I can't give him those things alone." "I can give him those things. I want to give him those things." "And you'd really adopt him? Give him your name?" "He'd be my son in every way that matters. I'd raise him right, teach him the ranch, leave him something when I'm gone." More silence. Lydia stared into the fire, and Caleb watched her profile, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw. She was pretty, he realized. He'd been too wrapped up in his own grief to notice before, but she was genuinely pretty, not flashy or delicate like Sarah had been, but strong and real and here. "All right," she said finally. "I'll marry you." Relief hit him like a physical blow. "You will?" "On one condition. We do this right. A real wedding, in the church, with witnesses. Not sneaking off to some justice of the peace like we're ashamed. If we're going to do this, we do it proper so no one can say it wasn't legal." "Agreed. And you have to promise me something else." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with tears. "Promise me you won't regret this. That you won't wake up one day and hate me for trapping you in a marriage you don't want." "Lydia." He reached out and took her hand, her fingers small and work-roughened in his. "You're not trapping me. I asked you, and I won't regret it. I promise you that." She squeezed his hand, and they sat there holding on to each other while the fire crackled and the night deepened outside. Tomorrow they'd ride to town and speak to the pastor. Tomorrow they'd face the gossip and the judgment and Herman Polk's rage. But tonight they had this, a quiet promise between two lonely people who'd found unexpected shelter in each other. The next morning, Caleb hitched up the wagon and drove Lydia into town, leaving Thomas with a neighbor woman he trusted. The ride was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts about what they were about to do. Pastor Reynolds was a good man, weathered and practical, who'd married Caleb and Sarah 15 years ago. He listened to Caleb's request without judgment, though his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. You want to marry Mrs. Rowan, the widow who's been living in your house. She's my housekeeper, Caleb said firmly. Has been for 6 weeks now. And yes, I want to marry her. Make it legal and proper. Mr. Rourke, I have to ask, is this a marriage of necessity? Is Mrs. Rowan in a family way? Lydia's face flamed red, but Caleb just fixed the pastor with a level stare. No, sir, this is a marriage of practicality. Mrs. Rowan needs a home and protection. I need help with my ranch and house. We suit each other and we're both old enough to make our own choices. Pastor Reynolds looked at Lydia. Is this what you want, Mrs. Rowan? You're under no obligation to marry this man just because he's given you shelter. I want to marry him, Lydia said, and her voice was steady. Mr. Rourke is a good man, and my son needs a father. I know what I'm doing. The pastor studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll post the banns this Sunday and marry you 3 weeks from today, assuming no one objects. That's proper, and gives the community time to— No. Caleb's voice was flat. I want to marry her today, right now. That's highly irregular, Mr. Rourke. So is a man threatening a widow with violence on my land. So is Herman Polk trying to claim she owes him something she doesn't owe. I want her protected now, not in 3 weeks when Polk's had time to cause more trouble. Understanding dawned in the pastor's eyes. Polk's been making threats? He came to my ranch yesterday with 2 armed men, tried to take Mrs. Rowan by force. She had to defend herself with my shotgun. Pastor Reynolds stood abruptly. I'll get my wife to witness. We'll do this now. The ceremony was quick and simple, with the pastor's wife and the church's elderly caretaker as witnesses. Caleb had no ring to give Lydia, but she didn't seem to care. She repeated the vows in a clear voice, promising to love and honor and cherish, and Caleb did the same, meaning every word, even though this wasn't supposed to be a real marriage. When the pastor said, "You may kiss your bride," Caleb hesitated. They hadn't discussed this part, but Lydia lifted her face to his, and he bent down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle, chaste, over in a moment. But that brief contact sent heat racing through his blood, made him want things he'd promised himself he wouldn't want. Congratulations, Pastor Reynolds said, shaking Caleb's hand. You're now husband and wife in the eyes of God and the law. They signed the certificate, and Caleb paid the pastor's fee. On the way out of the church, Lydia stumbled on the steps, and Caleb caught her arm. You all right? I just married a man I've known for 6 weeks. She laughed, high and shaky. I think I'm entitled to be a little unsteady. You can still change your mind. We could get it annulled before about— No. She gripped his arm tighter. No, I don't want to change my mind. I'm just nervous. Me too. That surprised her enough that she looked up at him. Really? I just married a woman I've known for 6 weeks, who also held off 3 armed men with my shotgun. I'd be a fool not to be nervous. She laughed again, and this time it sounded genuine. We're quite a pair, aren't we? That we are, Mrs. Rourke. Her eyes widened. I'm Mrs. Rourke now. You are. And something about saying it, claiming her with his name, felt right in a way Caleb hadn't expected. They stopped at the general store for supplies, and Caleb made sure to introduce Lydia as his wife to everyone they met. Word would spread fast. By tomorrow, the whole county would know that Caleb Rourke had married his housekeeper. Let them talk. Let Herman Polk hear it and know that Lydia was beyond his reach now. On the way home, they picked up Thomas from the neighbor. The boy bounced with excitement when Caleb told him the news. You're really my pa now. If you want me to be. Caleb's throat was tight. You can keep calling me Mr. Rourke if you'd rather, but yes, I'm your father now, legal and proper. Thomas threw his small arms around Caleb's neck and hugged him fierce and hard. I want to call you Pa. Caleb hugged him back. This small boy who'd become his son in the space of a morning, and felt something break loose in his chest. All the grief and loneliness he'd been carrying for 3 years, cracking open to make room for something new. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Caleb found Lydia standing in the doorway of the master bedroom, looking uncertain. I wasn't sure. She twisted her hands together. You said separate rooms, but there's only 2 bedrooms. Thomas needs his room, so should I? You take this room. Caleb gestured to the master bedroom. It's yours now. You're the lady of the house. But where will you sleep? I'll move my things to Sarah's old room, or I can sleep downstairs if that's better. No. She stepped into the master bedroom, looking around at the large bed, the solid furniture. No, you keep this room. I'll take Sarah's room. It's clean now, and it seems right somehow. Like she'd approve. Caleb thought about that, then nodded slowly. She would approve. Of all of this. Sarah always said I shouldn't be alone. They stood there awkwardly, newly married but not truly married, uncertain how to navigate this strange new arrangement. Finally, Lydia stepped forward and kissed his cheek, soft, quick, almost sisterly. Thank you, she whispered, for giving us a home, for protecting us, for being a good man when we needed one most. Thank you for bringing life back to this house. He touched her face briefly, his calloused fingers gentle on her skin, for making it feel like a home again. She smiled and turned away, disappearing into Sarah's room and closing the door softly behind her. Caleb stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the sounds of her moving around, getting ready for bed. His wife, Lydia Rourke. It felt strange and right all at once. He went to his own room and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. This was supposed to be practical, a business arrangement to protect her and give him help with the ranch. But already, after just one day of marriage, he was feeling things he shouldn't feel, protective and possessive, and hungry for more than the chaste kiss they'd shared in the church. This was going to be harder than he'd thought. But it was done now, legal and binding. Lydia was his wife, Thomas was his son, and no one, especially not Herman Polk, could change that. 3 days later, the sheriff rode up to the ranch. Caleb met him in the yard, Lydia standing on the porch behind him with her arms crossed. Sheriff Taylor, Caleb's voice was cool. What brings you out here? Got a complaint from Herman Polk. Says your woman shot at him, tried to kill him. My wife, Caleb corrected. And she didn't try to kill him. If she had, he'd be dead. She fired a warning shot to defend her home and family when Polk came here with armed men making threats. The sheriff's eyes flicked to Lydia, then back to Caleb. Your wife? Since when? Since 3 days ago. We were married by Pastor Reynolds in the church with proper witnesses. I see. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. Polk also says she owes him money, 3 months' rent. Polk threw her out before those 3 months were up. Deal was void. He's got no claim on her, and he knows it. That's why he's trying to use you to harass us. Sheriff Taylor was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. Look, Rourke, between you and me, I know what kind of man Polk is, but he's made an official complaint. I have to investigate. Then investigate. Caleb stepped aside, gesturing to Lydia. Ask my wife what happened. Lydia came down from the porch, her head high. Mr. Polk came to this property with 2 armed men. He threatened my husband and tried to take me by force. I defended my home. That's all that happened. You fired a gun at him. I fired a warning shot over his head. If I'd wanted to hit him, I would have. My father taught me to shoot, and I'm very good at it. The sheriff suppressed a smile. I don't doubt that, Mrs. Rourke. But Polk's claiming you're crazy, dangerous, says you should be arrested. On what charge? Caleb's voice went hard. Defending her property? That's legal. Polk was trespassing on my land, making threats. If anyone should be arrested, it's him. That's not how he tells it. Then he's lying, and you know it. The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Sheriff Taylor nodded. I'll tell Polk I investigated and found no grounds for arrest. But Rourke, keep your wife away from guns around him. I don't want to be scraping anyone off the ground because tempers got hot. Polk stays off my land, there won't be any tempers. You can tell him that too. The sheriff tipped his hat to Lydia. Ma'am, congratulations on your marriage. He rode away, leaving Caleb and Lydia standing together in the yard. He believed us, Lydia said quietly. He knows Polk. Everyone knows what kind of man he is. Caleb turned to her. But this isn't over. Polk's going to keep pushing until something breaks. Then we'll deal with it when it comes. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Together. He squeezed her hand and they stood there in the spring sunshine, married in name only but bound together by something stronger than passion, by necessity and respect, and the stubborn determination to protect what was theirs. Hermann Polk's reckoning was coming. But when it came, he would find not a vulnerable widow and a lonely rancher, but a united family willing to fight for their home. And they did fight. The next Sunday, Caleb took his new family to church for the first time as man and wife. He'd known there would be whispers, but he hadn't expected the cold silence that fell when they walked through the doors. Women turned away, pulling their skirts aside as if Lydia carried disease. Men stared with open speculation, their eyes moving between Caleb and Lydia in ways that made his jaw clench. Thomas pressed close to Lydia's side, frightened by the hostility. Caleb put his hand on the boy's shoulder and steered them to a pew near the front, the same pew he'd sat in with Sarah all those years ago. If the congregation wanted to judge them, they could do it while looking at the backs of their heads. Pastor Reynolds preached about compassion and not casting stones, his eyes pointedly sweeping the pews, but the damage was done. After the service, only 2 people approached them: Mrs. Henderson, the washerwoman, and old Mr. Carter, who owned the feed store. "Don't let them get to you," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, squeezing Lydia's hand. "Small minds make for cruel tongues. You hold your head high, Mrs. Rourke." "Thank you," Lydia whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. On the church steps, Hermann Polk blocked their path. He'd cleaned up since the confrontation at the ranch, wearing his Sunday suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, well, the happy couple," his voice carried across the churchyard. "Didn't take you long to trap yourself a rich rancher, did it, Lydia? Smart woman, spreading your legs for—" Caleb's fist connected with Polk's jaw before the man could finish. Polk went down hard, blood spurting from his split lip. Women gasped. Men rushed forward, some to help Polk, others to hold Caleb back. "You watch your mouth around my wife," Caleb growled, shaking off the hands trying to restrain him. "Or next time I'll do more than split your lip." "You're crazy." Polk scrambled to his feet, dabbing at his bleeding mouth. "Everyone saw it. He attacked me for no reason." "No reason?" Caleb took a step forward, and Polk actually backed up. "You called my wife a whore in front of the whole congregation. That's reason enough." Pastor Reynolds hurried down the steps. "Gentlemen, please. This is the Lord's house." "Then maybe Polk should remember the commandment about bearing false witness," Caleb said. He turned to Lydia, who stood frozen on the steps, her face white. "Come on. We're going home." They drove back to the ranch in tense silence. Thomas had fallen asleep against Lydia's side, exhausted by the tension. When they pulled up to the house, Lydia finally spoke. "You shouldn't have hit him." "He called you a whore." "I know what he called me, but now you've given him exactly what he wants, witnesses who saw you attack him. He can press charges, Caleb. He can have you arrested." "Let him try." Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist. "I won't let anyone speak about you that way. Not ever. I can handle cruel words. What I can't handle is you getting hurt because of me." She looked up at him, and the fear in her eyes was real. "You've given us so much. I couldn't bear it if protecting me cost you everything." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had finally spilled over. "You and Thomas are my family now. Protecting you doesn't cost me anything. It's what a man does for his family." She leaned into his touch, and for a moment they stood there in the afternoon sun, closer than they'd been since the chaste kiss at their wedding. Caleb wanted to kiss her again, properly this time, but Thomas stirred between them and the moment broke. That night, lying in his bed alone, Caleb admitted the truth he'd been avoiding. This wasn't just a practical arrangement anymore. Somewhere between the blizzard and the shotgun, between the quiet dinners and Thomas calling him Pa, he'd started to care for Lydia as more than just his housekeeper or his paper wife. He was falling for her, and that terrified him more than Hermann Polk ever could. The week that followed was quiet, deceptively peaceful. Caleb worked the ranch while Lydia tended the house and garden. Thomas followed Caleb everywhere, chattering endlessly about the horses and the cattle and the way the new calf could already run. They were playing at being a family, Caleb thought, and getting better at it every day. On Friday afternoon, Sheriff Taylor rode up again, and Caleb knew before the man dismounted that the news wasn't good. Polk filed charges, the sheriff said without preamble. Assault. Says you attacked him without provocation on church grounds. That's a lie and you know it. What I know doesn't matter. He's got a dozen witnesses who saw you hit him. Sheriff Taylor looked genuinely regretful. I have to take you in, Rourke. Judge Hartley will hear the case next week. Lydia appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron. No, you can't arrest him. He was defending me. I'm sorry, Mrs. Rourke, but the law's the law. The sheriff turned back to Caleb. You can come peaceful, or I can put you in irons. Your choice. Caleb looked at Lydia's stricken face, at Thomas peeking out from behind her skirts, and made a decision. I'll come peaceful, but I need 5 minutes to speak with my wife. The sheriff nodded and stepped back, giving them space. Caleb took Lydia into the house, away from the sheriff's hearing. This is my fault, she said immediately. If I hadn't... Stop. He gripped her shoulders. This is Polk's doing, not yours. He's trying to separate us, hoping you'll run if I'm locked up. I won't run. I know you won't. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. But you need to be careful while I'm gone. Keep the doors locked. Keep the shotgun loaded. If Polk or any of his men come around, you don't hesitate. You shoot first and answer questions later. Caleb, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Polk's desperate now, and desperate men do dangerous things. He pulled back enough to look at her face. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. She gripped his shirt. How long will they keep you? Until the hearing? A week? Maybe less if Judge Hartley can fit it in sooner. He smoothed her hair back from her face. You'll be all right. You're strong, Lydia. Stronger than you know. Thomas ran up and threw his arms around Caleb's legs. Pa, don't go. Don't let the bad man take you. Caleb knelt down and pulled the boy into a fierce hug. I have to go, buddy, but I'll be back soon. Meanwhile, you're the man of the house. You take care of your mama for me, all right? I will, Pa, I promise. The ride to town was long and humiliating. Word had spread, and people came out to watch as Sheriff Taylor brought Caleb in. Some looked sympathetic, but most just stared with the hungry curiosity of people watching someone else's misfortune. The jail cell was small and cold, with a narrow cot and a bucket. Caleb had never been locked up before, and the confinement made his skin crawl. But worse than the cell was the knowledge that Lydia and Thomas were alone at the ranch, unprotected except for a shotgun and Lydia's determination. Pastor Reynolds visited the next day, bringing food from his wife and news from town. Polk's telling everyone you're dangerous, that you've always had a violent temper, the pastor said. He's got people believing you married Mrs. Rowan just to have a woman to control, that you're no better than a brute. And what are you telling people? The truth. That I've known you 15 years and never saw you raise your hand to anyone who didn't deserve it. That Mrs. Rowan is a good woman who needed protection, and you gave it to her. Pastor Reynolds leaned closer to the bars. But Caleb, the truth doesn't always matter when lies are more entertaining. What about Judge Hartley? Is he a fair man? He is. But he's also up for re-election next year, and Polk has friends with money and influence. The pastor's expression was grave. I'm worried, Caleb. I won't lie to you. After the pastor left, Caleb lay on his cot and stared at the ceiling, rage and helplessness churning in his gut. This was exactly what Polk wanted, to separate him from Lydia, to make her vulnerable. And Caleb had walked right into the trap. 3 days into his confinement, Sheriff Taylor came to the cell with a telegram. It's from the county seat. Thought you'd want to see it. Caleb read the message twice, unable to believe what he was seeing. Herman Polk had been arrested. The charge, cattle rustling. Evidence had been found linking him to a ring of thieves operating across 3 counties. He was being held pending trial. How? Caleb looked up at the sheriff. How did they catch him? Anonymous tip led them to a hidden camp where they found stolen cattle with altered brands. Polk's been working with a gang out of Missouri, using his rental properties to hide stolen stock. Sheriff Taylor actually smiled. Looks like you won't be the only one seeing Judge Hartley after all. Does this mean I'm free? Not yet. You still hit him in front of witnesses. But the judge is coming tomorrow instead of next week. Says he wants to clear this up quick now that Polk's been exposed as a criminal. The sheriff lowered his voice. Between you and me, Rourke, I think you'll walk. Nobody's going to care about a split lip when Polk's looking at 5 years for rustling. The next afternoon, Caleb stood before Judge Hartley in the small courtroom. Polk was there too, in chains, looking smaller and meaner than Caleb remembered. The man's face was bruised. He'd apparently resisted arrest, and his eyes darted around the room like a trapped rat. "Mr. Rourke," Judge Hartley said, peering over his spectacles, "you're charged with assault on Mr. Herman Polk. How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor. I hit him, but I had cause." "Explain." Caleb told the story plainly. Polk's harassment of Lydia, his attempt to take her from Caleb's land, the threats, and finally the vile names he'd called her on the church steps. When he finished, the judge turned to Polk. "Mr. Polk, is this account accurate?" Polk snarled. "That woman is a whore who was living in sin with him for weeks before they married. She owed me money and—" "Answer the question. Did you call Mrs. Rourke a whore on the church steps? She is a—" "That's a yes." Judge Hartley's voice cut through Polk's rant. "Mr. Rourke, I'm fining you $5 for disturbing the peace. Consider yourself lucky I don't give you a medal instead. Case dismissed." The gavel came down, and Caleb felt 4 days of tension drain from his body. He paid his fine and walked out of the courthouse a free man. The first thing he did was head to the general store, where he knew Lydia had come to trade eggs for supplies. He found her coming out with Thomas, a basket on her arm. When she saw him, her face lit up like sunrise, and she ran to him, actually ran, propriety be damned, and threw her arms around his neck. "You're free. Oh, thank God, you're free." He held her tight, right there on Main Street with half the town watching. "Did you think I wouldn't be?" "I was terrified. I thought they'd send you to prison and Thomas and I would be alone again, and—" She was crying now, her face pressed against his shirt. "I was so scared. Pa!" Thomas crashed into them, wrapping his small arms around both their legs. "You came back!" Caleb picked up his son, and pulled his wife closer with his free arm. Let the town stare. Let them whisper. This was his family, and he'd burn down the world to keep them safe. That night, after Thomas was asleep and the dishes were washed, Lydia and Caleb sat together on the porch, watching the stars come out. It had become their habit, these quiet evenings when the work was done, sitting close but not touching, talking about nothing important or not talking at all. "Thank you," Lydia said softly, "for everything you did to protect me, for going to jail, for standing up to Polk, for—" "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do, because I think—" She turned to face him, and in the lamplight from the window he could see uncertainty and something else in her eyes. "I think somewhere along the way, this stopped being just an arrangement, for me at least." Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I care about you, Caleb, more than I should, given the terms we agreed to. I'm saying when you were locked up, I wasn't worried about losing my home or my security. I was worried about losing you." She took a shaky breath. "I understand if you don't feel the same way. I know this was supposed to be practical, nothing more, but I needed you to know." He stared at her, this brave, beautiful woman who'd shot Herman Polk's hat off his head and kept his house running while he was in jail and made him feel alive again after 3 years of just existing. And he made a choice. "It stopped being practical for me too," he said roughly. "I've been fighting it, telling myself I was too old to feel this way again, that you'd married me out of necessity and nothing more. But Lydia, when I was in that cell, all I could think about was you, coming home to you, keeping you safe, building a life with you." "A real life?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Not just a real life, a real marriage." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering on her cheek. "If that's what you want." "It's what I want." She leaned into his touch. "But Caleb, I need to know, am I just a replacement for Sarah? Because I can't be her. I'll never be her." "I don't want you to be Sarah." He said it firmly, needing her to believe him. "Sarah was my first love, and I'll always cherish what we had. But you're different. You're strong, where she was gentle, brave where she was cautious. You fit into my life in ways Sarah never could have, and I—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "You what?" "I love you." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I love you, Lydia Rourke, and I want this marriage to be real in every sense of the word. She kissed him. Not the chaste peck from their wedding, but a real kiss. Deep and desperate and full of months of denied wanting. Caleb kissed her back, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. She tasted like the apple pie she'd made for dessert, sweet and tart and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lydia rested her forehead against his. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for weeks now, but I was too scared to admit it. No more being scared. He kissed her again, softer this time. No more pretending this is just practical. What about separate rooms? He smiled against her lips. What about them? I think, she said slowly, her cheeks pink even in the darkness, that maybe we don't need them anymore. Heat flooded through him, but he forced himself to slow down. Are you sure? We don't have to rush. I can wait until you're ready. I'm ready. She looked up at him, and there was no doubt in her eyes. Take me to bed, Caleb. Your bed. Where I should have been all along. He stood and pulled her up with him, and they went into the house together, closing the door on the past and all its ghosts. That night, Caleb Rourke and Lydia Rourke became husband and wife in truth, and the house that had been so empty for so long was finally, truly, a home again. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new normal, one that felt right in ways Caleb had forgotten were possible. He'd wake to find Lydia beside him, her dark hair spread across the pillow, and feel gratitude so intense it hurt. They'd have breakfast as a family, with Thomas chattering about his plans for the day. Caleb would work the ranch, but now he'd come in for lunch and steal kisses in the kitchen while Lydia swatted him away, laughing. In the evenings, they'd sit together on the porch, her hand in his, while Thomas played with the barn cat. The town slowly came around. With Polk exposed as a criminal and awaiting trial, people began to see Caleb and Lydia's marriage in a different light. Mrs. Henderson made a point of inviting them to Sunday dinner. Mr. Carter gave them credit at the store without being asked. Even the women who'd turned away at church started nodding politely when they passed. Caleb didn't care about the town's approval, but Lydia did. She'd spent too long being judged, and the acceptance, grudging though it was, meant something to her. So he held his tongue when people who'd shunned her suddenly wanted to be friendly, and he let her rebuild the social connections she needed. Thomas thrived. He grew taller, stronger, more confident. He followed Caleb everywhere, learning to rope and ride and tend cattle. He called Caleb Pa without hesitation now, and when people asked if Thomas was Caleb's natural son, Caleb would say, "He's my son in every way that counts." The adoption papers came through in May, making it official. Thomas Rourke, legally and forever. They celebrated with a special dinner and a cake Lydia baked, and Thomas wore his best clothes and looked so proud Caleb had to turn away to hide the tears in his eyes. "You're crying, Pa," Thomas said, coming over to tug on his sleeve. "Happy tears, buddy, just happy tears." That night in bed, Lydia curled against Caleb's side and whispered, "Thank you for loving my son like he's yours." "He is mine." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "Just like you're mine." "Yours," she agreed, and kissed his chest. "Always." In June, Herman Polk was tried for cattle rustling and sentenced to 6 years in prison. Caleb and Lydia didn't attend the trial. They'd moved past Polk, past all the fear and anger he'd caused. But when Sheriff Taylor rode out to tell them the verdict, Caleb shook his hand and felt the last knot of tension in his chest finally release. "It's over," he told Lydia that evening. "He can't hurt us anymore." "It was over the moment we stood together," she said. "The moment we became a real family. That's when we won." She was right. They'd faced down threats and gossip and the law itself, and they'd emerged stronger for it. What had started as a desperate bargain in a blizzard had become something neither of them expected, a real love, a real marriage, a real family. But they weren't finished building that family yet. On a hot July afternoon, Lydia asked Caleb to sit down at the kitchen table, her face nervous and excited all at once. "I have something to tell you," she said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. It's just—" She took his hands. "Caleb, I'm pregnant." The world seemed to stop. Caleb stared at her, his mind trying to process what she'd just said. A baby. Their baby. After everything, after loss and loneliness and learning to love again. A baby. Are you sure? I'm sure. The doctor confirmed it yesterday when I went to town. Her eyes searched his face. Are you happy? I know we didn't plan this, and if it's too much... He pulled her into his lap and kissed her until they were both breathless. I'm happy. God, Lydia, I'm so damn happy I can barely breathe. She laughed, the sound bright and free. I was so worried you'd think it was too soon, or that you wouldn't want... I want everything with you. A house full of children, a lifetime of mornings waking up beside you, growing old together on this ranch. He pressed his hand to her still flat stomach. This baby is a gift, just like you and Thomas are gifts I never expected but can't imagine living without. Thomas burst into the kitchen, tracking mud across Lydia's clean floor. Pa, come see. The new calf is walking. In a minute, buddy. Your mom and I have something to tell you first. Caleb lifted Thomas onto his other knee, balancing both his son and his wife. How would you feel about being a big brother? Thomas's eyes went wide. A baby? Really? Really, Lydia said, smoothing his hair. Sometime around Christmas. Do you think you can help take care of a baby brother or sister? I'll be the best big brother ever. Thomas threw his arms around both of them. Wait until I tell Buck. He scrambled down and ran back outside, presumably to share the news with his favorite horse. Caleb and Lydia sat together in the kitchen, laughing at their son's enthusiasm, holding on to each other like they'd never let go. We're really doing this, Lydia said. Building a family, a life, everything. We really are. Caleb kissed her softly. And it's going to be amazing. That night, after Thomas was asleep and the house was quiet, Caleb stood at the window of his bedroom, their bedroom, and looked out at the ranch he'd built. The land that had felt like a burden when he was alone now felt like a legacy to pass down. The house that had been so empty now rang with laughter and love. He thought about Sarah, who he'd loved first and lost too soon. He hoped she could see him now, see that he'd found happiness again. He thought she'd approve of Lydia, of the woman who'd brought his house back to life and given him a reason to stop just surviving and start actually living. Lydia came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his waist. What are you thinking about? About how one blizzard changed everything, if you hadn't stumbled onto my porch that night, but I did. She rested her cheek against his back. And you let me in. You could have turned me away, sent me on to town, but you didn't. I'm glad I didn't. He turned in her arms and held her close. Best decision I ever made, letting you and Thomas into my life. Second best, she corrected with a smile. The best was making it permanent. He couldn't argue with that. Marrying Lydia had been practical, yes, but it had also been the moment he'd stopped being afraid to live again. The moment he'd chosen possibility over safety. They went to bed together, tangled in each other's arms, while outside the summer wind whispered through the prairie grass and the stars wheeled overhead. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges and all the small struggles of building a life. But tonight, they had this, warmth and love and the certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The lonely rancher wasn't lonely anymore. The desperate widow had found safety and love, and the house that had waited so long in silence was full of life again, ready for all the years of joy and sorrow and ordinary miracles still to come. Summer melted into autumn, painting the Kansas prairie in gold and amber. Lydia's belly grew round with new life, and Caleb found himself touching it constantly, in the kitchen while she cooked, on the porch in the evenings, in their bed at night. He'd press his palm against the swell and feel their child move beneath his hand, and every time it filled him with a wonder so profound he could barely speak. Thomas was beside himself with excitement about becoming a big brother. He talked to Lydia's stomach, telling the baby about the horses and the cattle and all the things they'd do together when the baby was big enough. He made drawings to hang in the nursery, the room that had been Sarah's, now cleaned and painted and filled with a cradle Caleb had built with his own hands. "Will the baby like me, Ma?" Thomas asked one evening as Lydia tucked him into bed. "The baby will love you," she assured him, kissing his forehead. "You're going to be the best big brother in the whole world. I'll teach the baby everything Pa taught me, how to feed the chickens and brush the horses and find the best fishing spots." His eyes were already drooping with sleep. and I'll protect the baby, just like Pa protects us. After Thomas fell asleep, Lydia found Caleb in their bedroom, staring at the cradle he'd finished that afternoon. It was beautiful work, smooth pine with carved animals on the sides, a family of deer on one end and a pair of horses on the other. "It's perfect," she said, running her hand along the polished wood. "I made one for my first child." His voice was rough. "Sarah lost the baby at 5 months. We never got to use it. I burned it after she died. Couldn't stand to look at it." He touched the cradle gently. "But this one feels different. This one feels like hope." Lydia wrapped her arms around him from behind, her swollen belly pressed against his back. "This baby is going to know nothing but love, Caleb. From both of us and from Thomas. We're giving this child everything we never had. Security, safety, a real family." He turned in her arms and kissed her deeply. "I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. You've given me everything." We gave each other everything. She smiled up at him. "Now let's get some sleep. This baby has been kicking all day, and I'm exhausted." They settled into bed together, Caleb curled protectively around Lydia with his hand on her belly. He felt a strong kick against his palm and smiled in the darkness. His child, his wife, his son sleeping down the hall. A year ago, he'd been alone in this house, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. Now everything had changed, and he sent up a silent prayer of thanks to whatever force had driven Lydia to his door that frozen night. October brought the first frost and news that spread through the county like wildfire. Herman Polk had died in prison. "An illness," the letter from the warden said, "quick and without much suffering." The man who'd terrorized Lydia, who'd threatened their family, who'd embodied all their fears, was simply gone. Caleb read the letter twice, then handed it to Lydia without comment. She read it standing at the kitchen counter, her face unreadable. When she finished, she folded it carefully and set it aside. "I should feel something," she said quietly, "relief or satisfaction or even pity, but I just feel nothing. He's gone, and it changes nothing about our lives." "Because we already moved past him." Caleb pulled her close, careful of her belly. "He stopped mattering the moment we decided to be a real family." "I suppose you're right." She leaned against his chest. "It's strange, though. For so long he was this presence in my life, this threat hanging over everything, and now he's just gone, like he never mattered at all." "He didn't matter, not really. He was just a cruel man who wielded what little power he had to hurt people weaker than him." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "The world's better off without him, but we're not going to waste energy celebrating his death. We've got better things to focus on. Like the baby, who was due in just 2 months. Like the ranch, which was thriving under Caleb's careful management. Like Thomas, who'd started reading from the primers Lydia taught him with, sounding out words by the fire in the evenings. They had a life now, full and real and good. And Herman Polk's death was just a footnote to their story. That Sunday, they went to church as a family, something that had become easier as the town's attitude toward them softened. Lydia was visibly pregnant now, and the women who'd once shunned her now stopped to coo over her belly and offer advice. Mrs. Henderson had organized a quilting bee to make blankets for the baby, and even the pastor's wife had contributed squares. After the service, they were approached by a young couple Caleb didn't recognize. The man was thin and nervous, his wife round-faced and timid. They introduced themselves as the Millers, new to the area and looking for work. "Mr. Carter at the feed store said you might be hiring," the young man said, twisting his hat in his hands. "I'm good with cattle and horses, and my wife's a hard worker. We've got references from back in Missouri, and we're willing to work for fair wages and a place to stay." Caleb studied them, seeing something familiar in their desperation. Young, poor, probably running from something or toward something better. He'd been that young man once, building this ranch from nothing. "I've got a line shack on the north pasture," he said slowly. "Needs some fixing up, but it's solid. You work the winter for me, prove yourself, and come spring we'll talk about permanent wages and building you a proper house on the property." The young man's face lit up with hope so bright it hurt to look at. "Yes, sir, thank you, sir. We won't let you down." "See that you don't?" Caleb shook his hand. "Report Monday morning. I'll show you the work that needs doing." After the Millers left, practically floating with relief, Lydia squeezed Caleb's arm. That was kind of you. That was practical. I need help with the ranch, especially with the baby coming. But he couldn't quite hide his smile. Besides, I remember what it's like to need someone to take a chance on you. Like I took a chance on you? She was teasing now, her eyes bright. Like we took a chance on each other. He helped her up into the wagon, his hand lingering on her back. Best gamble either of us ever made. November arrived with cold rain and gray skies. Lydia grew larger and more uncomfortable, her back aching, her sleep restless. Caleb did what he could, rubbing her feet in the evenings, taking over more of the heavy household work, making sure she rested. Thomas tried to help too, bringing his mother pillows and cups of water, patting her belly and telling the baby to stop kicking so much. The Millers moved into the line shack and proved to be good workers. Young Jacob Miller was quick to learn and didn't complain about the hard work. His wife, Emma, helped Lydia when she could, coming to the house twice a week to do the heavier cleaning and laundry. It was nice, Lydia thought, to have another woman nearby. Nice to have neighbors who felt like friends instead of judges. On a cold night in late November, Lydia woke Caleb with a hand on his shoulder and fear in her voice. It's time. He was up instantly, his heart hammering. You're sure? It's early. The baby doesn't care about dates, Caleb. It's coming. She gripped his hand as a contraction rolled through her. You need to get the doctor. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Please. Another contraction, stronger this time. Send Jacob for the doctor. You stay with me. Caleb dressed faster than he ever had in his life, pulling on boots and coat. He ran through the cold darkness to the line shack and pounded on the door. Jacob appeared, bleary-eyed and confused. My wife's in labor. Ride to town and fetch Dr. Morrison. Fast as you can. Jacob nodded and was moving before Caleb finished speaking. Caleb ran back to the house and up the stairs to their bedroom, where Lydia was breathing through another contraction, her face pale in the lamplight. I'm here. He took her hand. Jacob's gone for the doctor. What about Thomas? Still asleep. We'll deal with him when he wakes. Caleb smoothed her hair back from her sweaty forehead. What do you need? What can I do? Just stay with me. Don't leave me alone. Never. He kissed her hand. I'm not going anywhere. The next hours were the longest of Caleb's life. He'd been through childbirth once before, with Sarah, but that baby had come too early and too small and hadn't survived. This time felt different. Lydia was strong, the baby was full term, and Dr. Morrison arrived just as the sun was rising, his bag in hand and calm competence on his face. Thomas woke and appeared in the doorway, scared by his mother's cries. Caleb left Lydia long enough to take the boy downstairs, where Emma Miller had arrived to help. Is Mama going to die? Thomas asked, his eyes huge with fear. No, buddy, your mama's just working hard to bring your baby brother or sister into the world. Caleb knelt down and hugged him tight. It's scary to hear her hurting, but I promise she's going to be fine. Mrs. Miller is going to stay with you, and when the baby comes, you'll be the first to meet your new brother or sister. All right? Thomas nodded, not quite convinced but trusting his father. Caleb kissed his forehead and ran back upstairs where Lydia was gripping the bedpost and pushing with everything she had. Almost there, Dr. Morrison said. One more push, Mrs. Rourke. Lydia screamed, a sound of pure effort and determination, and then suddenly there was another sound, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn. Caleb's knees went weak with relief. It's a girl, Dr. Morrison announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. A healthy baby girl. Caleb moved to Lydia's side as the doctor cleaned and wrapped the baby. She was exhausted, her hair plastered to her head with sweat, but she'd never looked more beautiful to him. A girl, she whispered. Caleb, we have a daughter. He kissed her, tasting salt and tears. His or hers, he couldn't tell. You did it. You were so brave. I'm so proud of you. Dr. Morrison placed the baby in Lydia's arms, and Caleb got his first real look at his daughter. She was tiny and perfect, with a cap of dark hair and Lydia's delicate features. Her eyes were unfocused but alert, taking in this strange new world, and when Caleb touched her miniature hand, she gripped his finger with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm your pa, and that's your mama. And you've got a big brother downstairs who can't wait to meet you." "What should we name her?" Lydia asked, stroking the baby's cheek with gentle fingers. Caleb thought of Sarah, his first wife, who he'd loved and lost. Thought of Lydia, his second wife, who'd brought him back to life. Thought of the future stretching ahead, full of promise and hope. "Hope," he said. "Let's name her Hope, because that's what she represents. Hope for the future. Hope that good things can come after loss. Hope that families can be built from broken pieces." Lydia smiled through her tears. "Hope Rourke, it's perfect." Well, they let Thomas come up to meet his sister, and the boy was appropriately awed by the tiny creature in his mother's arms. He touched her hand carefully, his expression serious and protective. "I'm going to take care of you," he told the baby solemnly. "I'm your big brother, and I won't let anything bad happen to you ever." Caleb pulled his son close with one arm while keeping the other around Lydia and the baby. His family, complete now in a way he'd never imagined possible. 2 children, a wife he loved more than his own life, a home full of warmth and laughter and purpose. Dr. Morrison left after ensuring both mother and baby were healthy. Emma Miller brought up food and fresh linens, cooing over the baby before leaving the new family alone. Caleb helped Lydia get cleaned up and settled more comfortably in bed, the baby sleeping in her arms. "Thank you," Lydia said softly. "For what?" "For taking us in that night. For protecting us. For loving us." She looked up at him with eyes full of emotion. "For giving me a home and a family and a life I never dreamed I could have again." "You gave me the same things." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "I was half dead before you came, Lydia, just going through the motions. You and Thomas brought me back to life, and now hope." He touched his daughter's soft hair. "Now we have everything." "Not quite everything." Lydia's smile turned mischievous despite her exhaustion. "We don't have a bigger house yet." He laughed, the sound startling the baby, who made a small noise of protest. "Are you saying this house isn't big enough?" "I'm saying if we're going to keep having babies, we might need to add on a few more rooms." "More babies?" His heart swelled at the thought. "You want more children?" "Eventually, when I've recovered from this one." She shifted Hope to a more comfortable position. "But yes, I want more. I want to fill this house with children and noise and life. And I want everything we never had growing up. Brothers and sisters who love each other, parents who are there, a home that feels safe. Then that's what we'll have." He leaned down and kissed her softly. "However many children you want, however big we need to make the house, we'll build it together." They settled into the new rhythm of life with an infant. Sleepless nights and endless diapers, the sweet weight of hope in their arms, the exhaustion mixed with joy. Thomas adjusted to being a big brother with the seriousness of someone given an important job. He'd help change diapers and fetch blankets and sing to Hope when she cried, his young voice surprisingly soothing. The ranch continued to thrive. Young Jacob Miller proved himself valuable enough that Caleb made the arrangement permanent come spring, giving the couple a plot of land to build their own house and a fair wage. It felt good to help someone else the way Caleb had once needed help, to pass along the opportunities he'd been given. Winter settled over the prairie, but the house stayed warm. Caleb added insulation and repaired the windows, making sure his family would never be cold again. He built toys for the children, a rocking horse for Thomas, a wooden rattle for Hope. He worked the ranch during the day and came home to a house full of life every evening. One night in January, after both children were asleep, Caleb and Lydia sat by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms. Outside, snow fell softly, reminding them both of that first night a year ago, when Lydia had stumbled to his door, half frozen and desperate. "Do you ever think about that night?" Lydia asked, reading his thoughts. "About how different things could have been if you'd turned us away?" "Every day." He held her closer. "If I'd sent you to town, you might have died. Or if you'd survived, you might have ended up with some other man, living some other life. And you'd still be alone in this big house. Probably would have sold it eventually, couldn't stand the emptiness." He kissed her hair. "But I didn't turn you away, and you didn't die, and here we are." "Here we are," she echoed. "Happy, together, loved. More than I ever thought I'd be again." He turned her face up to his. I want you to know something, Lydia. This marriage, this family, it's not just practical anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. This is real. This is forever. You're not just the woman who needed shelter. You're the love of my life, the mother of my children, my partner in everything. Tears spilled down her cheeks, catching the firelight. I know. I feel the same way. What started as necessity became something more, something better than I ever imagined possible. He kissed her then, deep and slow, tasting salt and sweetness. When they finally broke apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. I love you, she whispered. Not because you saved me, not because you gave me security, but because you're you, stubborn and kind and strong and gentle all at once. Because you love my son like he's yours. Because you gave me hope in more ways than one. Because when I look at you, I see home. I love you too. His voice was rough with emotion, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret stumbling onto my porch that night. Never. She smiled through her tears. Best decision I ever made, freezing to death in the right place. He laughed and pulled her close, and they sat there in the firelight while the snow fell outside and their children slept upstairs. The house that had been so empty was full now, full of love and laughter and the messy, beautiful chaos of family life. Spring came again, bringing green grass and wildflowers, baby calves and new beginnings. Thomas turned 5 and started real lessons with a primer Caleb bought in town. Hope grew strong and healthy, her dark hair turning lighter, her eyes settling into the same storm gray as her father's. She smiled at Caleb when he came in from work and reached for him with chubby hands, and every time it melted his heart completely. Lydia bloomed too, her figure returning, her strength renewed. She worked in the garden she'd planted, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers to brighten the house. She became friends with Emma Miller and several other women in town, building the social connections that made a place feel like home. On Sundays, the whole family would dress up and go to church, where they were greeted warmly now instead of with suspicion and whispers. The ranch prospered. Caleb bought more cattle, fixed up the outbuildings, improved the land. He was building something now, not just a working ranch, but a legacy to pass down to his children. Thomas showed interest in the work, following Caleb everywhere, asking endless questions about the animals and the land. Caleb was patient, teaching his son everything he knew, the way his own father had once taught him. On a warm evening in May, Caleb found Lydia sitting on the porch with Hope in her arms, watching Thomas chase the barn cat through the yard. She looked content and peaceful, more beautiful than ever in the golden sunset light. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her. "How far we've come." She leaned against his shoulder. "A year and a half ago, I thought my life was over. I had no home, no money, no hope for the future. And now look at us. We have everything." "We do." He put his arm around her, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "Though I heard you talking to Emma about maybe having another child." She blushed. "You heard that?" The window was open. He grinned. "So? Is it true?" "Maybe. Eventually." She looked up at him, suddenly shy. "Would you want another baby?" "I'd want a dozen babies if you wanted them." He kissed her temple. "Though I'd settle for 2 or 3 more. Fill up this house the way you said." 2 or 3 more, she repeated, laughing. "You're ambitious. I'm greedy. I've got a good thing here, and I want to hold on to it as long as possible." He took Hope from her arms and cradled his daughter against his chest. The baby stirred but didn't wake, trusting completely in her father's arms. "These children, this family, it's everything I never knew I needed." "Me too." Lydia rested her head on his shoulder, watching Thomas finally catch the cat and scoop it into a gentle hug. "We built something good here, didn't we? Something that'll last." "We built something extraordinary." He kissed the top of her head. "And we're not done yet. We've got years ahead of us. Years of watching these kids grow, years of working this land together, years of loving each other." "Promise me something," she said quietly. "Anything. Promise me you'll never regret it. Even when times get hard, even when the kids are difficult or money's tight or we're both exhausted. Promise me you'll remember this feeling and know it was all worth it." "I promise." He said it firmly, without hesitation. "Lydia, there's not a single moment I regret. Not one decision, not one choice. This marriage, this family, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that you stumbled onto my porch that night." She turned and kissed him, soft and sweet, while Hope slept between them, and Thomas played in the yard and the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was an ordinary moment, really, nothing dramatic or life-changing. Just a family together on their porch, loving each other in the quiet way that built lifetimes. But to Caleb and Lydia, it was everything. It was the fulfillment of promises made in desperation and kept in love. It was proof that broken people could heal, that lonely hearts could find connection, that families could be built from nothing more than necessity and hope and stubborn determination. The lonely rancher wasn't lonely anymore. The desperate widow had found not just shelter, but a home, a real home, with love and laughter and children who'd grow up knowing they were wanted. What had started with a blunt proposal, "I need a wife tonight, and you need a roof," had become a love story neither of them expected, but both would cherish forever. As the stars came out and the prairie settled into evening quiet, Caleb Rourke held his wife and daughter close and watched his son play in the twilight. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, about loss and grief, and the courage it took to open his heart again. He thought about Lydia's bravery, Thomas's resilience, Hope's pure trust in the world, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and solid and worth fighting for. They'd faced down threats and gossip, fear and uncertainty, and they'd come through stronger, together. Thomas ran up the porch steps, breathless and grinning. "Pa, did you see? I caught smoke all by myself." "I saw, buddy. You're getting quick." Caleb ruffled his son's hair. "Time to wash up for bed." "Can you tell me a story about when you and Ma first met?" Lydia and Caleb exchanged glances, sharing a smile full of private memories. "I think we can do that," Lydia said. "Come on, let's get you inside." They went into the house together, the whole family, and Caleb closed the door on the night. Inside was warmth and light, and the sound of Thomas's chatter as he raced up the stairs. Inside was the smell of Lydia's cooking and the soft weight of hope in his arms. Inside was home. Real, permanent, forever home. And as Caleb settled into the rocking chair to tell his son the story of a blizzard and a desperate widow and a lonely man who took a chance on love, he sent up a prayer of thanks for second chances, for brave women and resilient children, for houses that became homes and strangers who became family, for a life rebuilt from broken pieces into something beautiful and whole and entirely worth living. The end.